So there's been a lot of people that have been talking about back button focus, and there's a lot of videos out there. But I kind of want to talk about this because a lot of things have changed in the last 5 years, and I just kind of wanted to give this subject a little update. Now, just to kind of give you a quick overview of what back button focus is, you're purely focusing with the back button, and then with the shutter, you're just snapping the photo. And the reason that a lot of people like doing this is because it's a simple way to focus and recompose. So with back button focus, you can focus on the actual person and put your focus points on them. And then you just click the shutter and it's not gonna focus again. And that's the problem with front shutter focus is every time you hit the like half press the shutter, it's going to refocus again and it's going to make all these mistakes. Now, what a lot of people do to combat this is they use an autofocus lock button. So they'll just assign one camera button to autofocus lock, and that way they can focus and recompose. But the problem with focus and recomposing is a lot of times you're moving the camera just a little bit, and that little bit of motion can make your subject out of focus. So for years, people have been drilling that back button focus is the best way to focus, but all of that has recently changed with the invention of AI and the new autofocus for eye autofocus, wildlife autofocus. I mean, today we're able to track cars and planes and animals and insects and reptiles. And so back button focus isn't as good as it once was. And the problem with back button focus is you have two steps. So you have to focus with the back button and then you have to use your index finger to click the shutter. And that may not take a lot of time, but it is problematic. It does sometimes miss the shot. And then another problem with back button focus is this, it's not ergonomically sound. So I'm just going to show you here. If I'm holding here, I'm focusing with one hand. This is not easy to do. And then pressing the shutter, it's a lot easier if I can just rest my thumb here and hold the shutter. It's a lot more comfortable, it's more ergonomic, and it's the ideal way to take a photo. Now, the cool thing with eye autofocus is most people can just easily use the front shutter button, focus on the eyes, and then they can recompose wherever they want in the frame. So it doesn't matter, they're still gonna nail focus every time as long as they have eye autofocus enabled, and it's not gonna be a problem. You don't really need back button focus. So this is gonna be especially good for wedding photographers. I would say a lot of wedding photographers probably don't need to rely on back button focus as much now with eye autofocus because eye autofocus pretty much does all the work. The only problem with eye autofocus is if there's a lot of people in the frame. But what you can do with newer cameras is there's with a lot of the Sony cameras, there's actually like subject detection, or you can actually take a picture of the bride and the groom, and it will automatically, throughout that crowd of people, find that designated person that you assign to your autofocus, and you don't have to worry about all the other people getting in your shot. It's going to nail focus every time on the bride, as long as if that's your number one priority person. So this is just kind of a really cool feature, I think, for photographers, and I think it's a reason why a lot of photographers can probably just do away with back button focus. I've actually gone between back button and front button focus for years. I started with front button, and then I went to back button, and then I went back to front button, and now I'm kind of on the fence. And that's kind of why I'm making this video, because I do a lot of different things. I do landscapes and I do portraits and I do wildlife. And there's really not a clear-cut answer on which focusing method is best. If you're doing birds or wildlife or anything that has an eye in it, I would say front shutter focus is going to be the best way to go. In my current setup, what I actually have right now is I have back button focus enabled because I don't do as many portraits today. And then I have it set up to DMF on the Sony cameras. If you enable DMF, that just means that anytime you move the focus ring, it will manually focus. So it doesn't matter what setting you're in. You don't have to click anything. You just move your focus ring and it will automatically manually focus everything. And for me, this is like the best setup because I do landscapes. And so it's just really nice to be able to manually focus to make sure that I'm nailing everything in focus. And then for everything else, I just keep it on autofocus and I switch between birds or people, or I guess I could do cars or trains, which I don't really do, but that's a feature that I could add later. Now, another reason why you may not want to use back button focus is if you don't have a joystick. So there's a lot of cameras that actually don't have a joystick, like pretty much any of the Sony APS-C cameras, the A7C, the A7CR, none of those have a joystick, which if you're using back button focus, it just makes it harder, especially if you have to use like a D-pad on the back and move your focus points like up and down, right and left. That's not easy to do. And so for people that have cameras like that, I would just recommend not using button focus. I mean, you might think that maybe you could just use the touch screen on the back, but it's problematic using the touch screen because if you're trying to hold the camera and focus at the same time, it's just a lot of times not as easy. Even though I know a lot of people use it and it's really useful, but if you are using the touchscreen, I would say back button focus is not a bad option to use. And it's something you might want to consider. So what's the solution? What is the best focus method? I would say, I mean, leave your comments below. I want to hear what you have to say, but I would say that back button focus for most people is probably the best option unless you don't have a joystick. A lot of people will get by just fine if you're only shooting birds or wildlife or people. With a camera that has eye autofocus, you don't need back button focus. If you are doing landscapes or if you need to track something like really well, it's always better to just use those focus points. Eye autofocus doesn't always work, especially for like wildlife, for birds and animals that are really small, and a lot of times the camera messes up. And that's another reason to use back button focus. But for a lot of us that are just shooting portraits most of the time, I think we can easily rely on front shutter focus. So for the majority of us, back button focus for like the professional, I think is ideal, especially if you've been using it for years and you know how to do it. But you might want to just try and switch to front shutter focus and see how you like it. It's definitely something to consider. I think it makes things a little faster and it's more comfortable in the hand. So something to consider so you don't get that thumb arthritis quicker. Front shutter focus can be a lot better and a lot more comfortable for your hand. So it's something that you might want to consider for comfort. All right, guys, so share your thoughts below. I want to hear what you have to say on this. I know this is a controversial subject. Now, I know a lot of the pros and a lot of the big YouTubers like Tony Northrup and Jared Polin, a lot of those people are using back button focus. They've been doing it for years. It's comfortable for them. They're not going to switch. I think there are other people that are newer that are starting to use front shutter focus because they're mainly shooting portraits, and then pretty much all the landscape photographers out there are just doing manual focus. If you are doing sports, I don't know. Sports is a little bit harder because you may even want to do like tracking, but a lot of times if you have autofocus, and you get close enough to the player, it's gonna nail it every time. But there are some instances where it won't, and if you have back button focus, you can always have both. You can have the ability to track eyes, and you can be able to manually move those focus points to get them where you want them to be. So I know this is a controversial subject. Leave your comments below. I want to hear your thoughts on this, and please subscribe and like, and I will see you in the next one, and I hope you have a great day. Thanks.